of Canada's concessions in this deal was to include language that holds Canada hostage to the Americans if we decide to trade with another country. No wonder the Minister of Foreign Affairs tried to downplay questions about this yesterday. Experts have called this concession a severe restriction on Canadian independence and capability, and that the Americans are trying to control our trade.
Canada retains full sovereignty and complete control over our trade relations.
Well, the champagne is flowing at the Trump Tower today, Mr. Speaker. They gave Trump a veto power over our other trade deals.
Before we got this deal, what we were hearing from the Conservatives is that we needed to start surrendering as quickly as possible.
The dissection of the new trade deal with the United States continues today. There were, of course, many questions about Canada's concessions. One that is raising some eyebrows is a clause that would force Canada to give the U.S. and Mexico a heads up when negotiating any trade deals with, quote, non-market countries, which includes China. Is this a veto, as the Conservatives are calling it, or is Canada's sovereignty intact, as Foreign Affairs Minister Chrysler Freeland says? It's time for the Power Panel. In Toronto, Amanda Alvaro of Pomp and Circumstance, and next to her, Chad Rogers of Crestview Strategy. Here with me in studio, political commentator and former NDP MP Françoise Bovin, and Evan Dyer of CBC News. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. Amanda, I'm going to start with you. Is it a veto?
No, it's not. And this is what's crazy about this is that it doesn't look that different from what was formerly known as the NAFTA agreement. I think what people are taking issue with is this 6-month withdrawal clause, which actually existed in the former agreement. And the way that it's being positioned is that Canada is the one who has to disclose when looking at a free trade agreement with a non-market economy, and the other parties aren't subject to the same thing is just flat out wrong.
I don't think the U.S. is pursuing an FTA with China.
But it doesn't matter. If they were going to, it's absolutely reciprocal amongst all parties in the agreement. You can withdraw just like you could under the NAFTA agreement. So this is one of those things where the Conservative Party is digging into a little nugget and trying to make a mountain out of a molehill.
Chad, what do you think?
Look, I spent the day in downtown Toronto with lots of business people. They're awfully happy that we're closer to the finish line. If I have to be political about it, I'm not worried about the government's previous rush to try and have a trade agreement with China. I think any cooling element on that is good. China is not a fair free market partner. And I think the entire resolution of this NAFTA saga is like the Gimli glider, the plane that ran out of power, that they just slowly landed safely in Manitoba. And it was a victory of a plane crash. No one was hurt. This whole negotiation has been a plane crash with survivors. It was a victory of a horrible outcome.
Evan, it's not just, I take their point that the opposition is saying a lot about it, but it was also Roland Paris, who's a former advisor, foreign policy advisor to the Prime Minister. Katie interviewed him earlier today. He was saying it's extraordinary that, I take again the point around the 6-month withdrawal, but that it's tied directly to China.
No, and I take his point, and you have to think another non-market economy, according to the U.S., is Vietnam. Well, Vietnam's a member of the TPP. If this clause had been in effect when we were negotiating the TPP, and the U.S. pulled out of the TPP, what would it have meant for that? So there is a legitimate question there, but I think at the same time, you can't negotiate a trade agreement without giving up some of your sovereignty. There isn't one that doesn't involve a give of some sovereignty, right? The old NAFTA did. You know, Chapter 11 was definitely a giveaway of our sovereignty, and it cost Canada a lot of money. It opened Canada to be sued just for passing laws that we thought were in the public interest, and we paid, as a consequence of those lawsuits, hundreds of millions of dollars. And actually, let's point out that this new USMCA, I've heard something.
I can't remember.
USMCA, we're going to call it that. So the new agreement got rid of Chapter 11 for us, but it remains to some extent for Mexico. So the government could say, well, we've actually recovered some of our sovereignty, both on that and on the proportionality agreement, which has also gone from the new NAFTA. And not only that, but by holding out, we got a better deal than Mexico, which is still subject to being sued by U.S. companies in the energy sector alone. Only in that sector, but it still has some of Chapter 11 hanging over.
Do you think, Françoise, that this is kind of the nail in the coffin of a formal pursuit of a formal free trade agreement with China? There had been issues, all along. And we know that the Prime Minister visited there last year, but came home without an announcement, essentially signaling the start of those talks.
I think the message from the U.S. is pretty clear. we're not too keen on dealing with China, and if you want to be our friend, it's very hard to be the friend of the other. And it's nothing different than if you're having a party at your place and you know two people don't like each other. You might tell them, by the way, I'm inviting this one, and nobody will be surprised, and then you have a decision to make if you're going or not. The only thing I like about kind of the bickering that we're hearing at question period, because that's what question period is about, is at the same time it gives us a bit of information, because not everybody is going to read the whole treaty. And by every day we learn something. Today we learn about pharmaceutical, we learn a bit about China, so I think it's good for our democracy to have the full portrait. I wish it was the government coming out instead of just spewing some kind of Boy Scout or Girl Scout type of rhetoric. It's fantastic. There was nothing a week ago, but now we solved everything and everything is great. And just say, listen, here's the picture. Here's what we've negotiated. Here's what's left. There's still some negotiations to happen. I mean, even EU is not completed yet. So it's a long process. A lot of people will talk about it for a long time. But the bottom line, I think, economically, there's a lot of people who are in the business community who are happy now. Not totally ecstatic, but happy that finally we can sit at the same table as somebody who's been called a bully like Donald Trump and not be the enemy at the table. I think it's not a role that Canada like to have.
I think, and I'll play a clip right now because I think Mr. Trump, President Trump, was talking about the deal again today. Have a listen.
New trade agreement is called the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA, like YMCA or United States Marine Corps with an A at the end. I like the way it sounded.
So finally, I have a trick to remember this name. Amanda, what do you think about the way, what's left, I guess, what challenges are left for the federal government in selling this deal going forward, and where those challenges exist?
Well, interestingly, somebody told me that, yesterday was a day where more people tuned in and ratings were highest and Canadians were actually really engaged in some of the details. And I think that that's surprising to some people. I think people think that, they hear terms like NAFTA or USMCA, YMCA, however he described it, and they tune out because it feels like it's too big and it's too broad and it's too all-encompassing, and that just really hasn't been the case. Canadians actually do care about the details. So I agree with some of the comments that my fellow panelists have made today. I think it's really important and incumbent on the government to continue to dish out some of those details. Not just spell out the fact that it's been a win, and it has been a win. And is it a good deal? Yes, it's a good deal. Is it a perfect deal? Absolutely not. But name one that is. But I think it is important for them to spell out the details because I think that there's an engaged Canadian public who wants to know more.
Chad, you're kind of raising your eyebrows, shaking your head. How am I to interpret that?
Well, we've got to get the deal approved, so it's not done yet. So let's not run the full victory lap yet. Secondly, we've still got steel tariffs to deal with, and that's something that has an immediate impact on Canadian jobs, Canadian wealth creation. So while the market is rewarding stability, the value of the dollar, the market performance in the last 2 days, we've still got a couple of pretty big pieces in play in terms of our negotiations, so we can't take our eye off the ball.
Okay, I'm going to take a quick break. We've got more Power Panel coming up, though. You're watching Power and Politics.